ॐ तव कथामृतं तप्तजीवनं कविविरीडितं कल्मषापहं श्रवणमङ्गलं श्रीमदाततं भुवि गृह्णन्ति ये भूरिदा जनाः. So we were discussing Sri Ramakrishna's conversation with the father-in-law of Rakhal's father. So Rakhal, who was later known as Swami Brahmananda, his father, as I told you earlier, allowed his son in the initial stages to come to Dakshineshwar to meet Sri Ramakrishna only because he felt that a lot of important people like Keshav Chandra Sen and many other prominent people of Kolkata of those days, they used to visit. So he did not have an idea that Rakhal, who was spiritually inclined and he would perhaps give up the world and become a monk. He was under the impression that this contacts with these important people will be good for his career. So as a result, he encouraged Rakhal to go in the beginning. But when he saw that Rakhal was showing less and less interest in the world, and even though he was forcibly married, he was showing absolutely no interest to lead a worldly life. Thakur's influence was so much on him, Sri Ramakrishna's influence, and Sri Ramakrishna considered him to be the mind-born son. So naturally, he held Rakhal in he had a great faith in Rakhal's spiritual ability. And in fact, he saw in a vision that Rakhal was a cowherd friend of Sri Krishna in the incarnation as Sri Krishna, who was a very close companion and used to play with Sri Krishna. So that vision convinced him, and Sri Ramakrishna's judgment, as Swamiji says, whatever Sri Ramakrishna said or whatever he uttered about somebody, it all invariably, not invariably, it definitely would come true. So Swamiji had more faith in Sri Ramakrishna's words than his own rational understanding of certain people. So whenever if Sri Ramakrishna had said something, he knew that it would happen and it was only truth. Truth alone would come out of his lips. So about Rakhal, he had made that prophecy that he is my mind-born son, and he saw in a vision, and his judgment of people was based on intuitive experience, either in the form of vision or something which mother revealed to him. So all the disciples, whether they were householders or some of them were young boys who later on became monks, in either case, he would get a hint of the samskaras of that person, what are the basic traits and how he should guide them and which is the path they should follow. So Swami Brahmananda, who was at that time known as Rakhal, his father was very keen in the beginning, but later on he just started coming, and he's not yet, he's still he brought his own father-in-law, and perhaps he was an educated gentleman, so he's asking him different questions. Alexander Pope, who wrote a book, he wrote about the first cause. So the first great cause through which this creation has come into being was least understood. That is what Alexander Pope wrote. So his father of Rakhal's father-in-law of Rakhal's father was telling Sri Ramakrishna. Alexander Pope also used to say, because they had more faith in these Western readers or Western writers, and he believed that we can't understand what Ishvara's or Lord's will or the great cause as he was known by the Western philosophers. They did not want to accept that God can incarnate. So at least they accepted the fact that there should be a great cause, because they saw, according to science, everything goes by cause and effect. So if there is an effect, there must be a cause. So what is the cause of that cause? And then you go on and on and on. Then they finally said there should be a great cause. But now Rakhal's father's father-in-law, who had perhaps been to the university, or he was at least he had read philosophy, is quoting Alexander Pope, who wrote, "Thou great first cause, least understood." So that was the famous sentence. So Sri Ramakrishna says, answering this, he says there is virtue as well as vice, but he means the Lord is not tainted by them. There are good and bad smells in the air, but the air itself is neither good, neither has a good smell or a bad smell. It is neutral. It is the good and bad smell in the air which spreads and gives an appearance that this air itself is polluted. But basically, it is the smell particles of those particular substance which give the smell. It's not the air. Then there are virtue and vice, real and unreal. All these things are different in nature, but they don't change the nature of Ishvara or the Lord himself. They are Prakriti. So how can Prakriti change the nature of Purusha? Because they are separate, eternally separate. Though the presence of Purusha or the presence of Brahman gives this appearance, which is due to Maya or Prakriti, a sense, a semblance of reality. That is why we can't say it is totally unreal. So Swami Vivekananda defined Maya as something which is a statement of fact. And that unreal existence or dependent existence, which depends for its existence on the pure consciousness that is behind it, is always sort of eluding us. The moment we try to catch hold of Maya like a mirage, it vanishes. So that is why it is known as unreal. But it is real in the sense it can be seen. See, for example, in mirage, you see the water there, but it recedes from you the more nearer you go to it. So that is how, when you try to grasp Prakriti, no matter how big a scientist is or how big a philosopher he is, Alexander Pope. So you may say it is a great cause, but what is a great cause? How can you define that great cause? Things are not so easy. That's why Sri Ramakrishna then gives another example. In the case of trees, some bear mangoes, others bear jackfruit, and yet others hawk plums. So different varieties of fruits are there. Some are tasty, some are. So there is a lot of diversity in nature. And then he says, discussing about ethics and other things, he says, even wicked people are needed, especially when God creates, or if we have to understand the Leela of the Lord, then we have to make allowance for both. You can't have good without having the bad. It's a relative thing. You can't even appreciate what light is if there is no darkness. So also, Sri Ramakrishna gives another a slightly simple example, or maybe it may appear crude, but he says they send a ruffian to an estate where the inhabitants are rough. So if there are rough people or tough people living who create a lot of trouble, then the estate manager sends ruffians to control them. You can't send good people to control such evil-minded people. Then alone the estate is properly administered. So Sri Ramakrishna says there is a need for everything. To take care of the bad things that are happening in the universe, then there should be some strong bad people also who can neutralize them. So it's like removing one thorn by the other. Sri Ramakrishna again talks about the life of the household. Then Sri Ramakrishna is telling the devotees, and this includes Rakhal's father and his father's father-in-law and other devotees. Most of them are householders. Perhaps Rakhal is not there. So Sri Ramakrishna is trying to explain to them that just as you see variety, there are mangoes, there are hawk plums, so there are human beings of different kinds. Then he says, do you know what happens when you live as a householder? a lot of your mental powers are unnecessarily expended. They are, I mean, what he wants to say is unnecessarily expended means they are wasted over trivial things. This wastage of mental powers can be made up or recovered only by embracing sannyasa. Then he says something very significant. He says, your father is responsible for your first birth, which is your biological birth. Your second birth is when your sacred thread ceremony is performed. That is why we call him Dvija. Dvija means the twice born. Aja means to be born. Dvija means twice born. So twice born means that now you have graduated from just an animal or a biological being by the by giving the Gayatri. The father gives you the Gayatri mantra and initiates you into a slightly higher kind of life, and you become the twice born Dvija. Your second birth is when your sacred thread ceremony is performed. Now this even can mean mantra diksha also, because in those days when the father gave diksha, he had to give the Gayatri mantra, which the equivalent of the Gayatri mantra is the mantra given, or maybe the mantra given by a guru can be considered to be an equivalent of the Gayatri mantra. The mantra or the meaning is the same, but the Gayatri mantra is a general kind of mantra, though it is very powerful, and it can be given by anybody. Especially it can be given by the father to the son, provided he has himself received it from his father. So it comes down in a tradition, but because the other mantras which are not based on Gayatri, because they come down from a very strong tradition, not just from your biological father and his biological father, so they may not be spiritual people. That's why its effectiveness is less. That's why Thakur says your second birth is when your sacred thread ceremony is performed. Your father was responsible for the first birth, which was your biological birth. Then he took you a stage ahead in life when he made you a twice born. And then finally, the third birth is when you enter monastic life. So that is when the Guru gives you the mantra for freedom or the highest possible life, the third life, where everybody in those days, sannyas ashram was the last ashrama. Even if you are a householder, householders are also at the end of their life, after vanaprastha, after a gradual retreat. There was a period when having earned enough, you simply start planning for retirement, and then you slowly retire and then take up an active spiritual life, which was known as sannyasa. So that was the system which was designed by our ancestors, but unfortunately now sannyasa is taken by people directly from Dvija state. Most of the sannyasi traditions, they first give brahmacharya, irrespective of, it was only during the middle, some Puranic age, that only Brahmins were entitled for sannyas, or at the most Kshatriyas, only two Varnas. But according to Swamiji, all can receive this, because all have the right to have a second spiritual birth. So irrespective of which caste you belong to. But in any case, uh, the first diksha that is given in any monastic order is the brahmacharya diksha, and that means even if his father has performed some people may be lucky to have the Gayatri mantra even before they become brahmacharis, but whether you get it from your father or not, the tradition is that everybody is given after a few years of training the brahmacharya mantra, that is the Gayatri mantra. And after a period, after some practice of sadhana as brahmacharis, then the sannyasa is given, when the final vows of which will enable you to get liberation are given. So that is why Thakur says the first birth is when, because of your father, you are born as a biological child. Then Dvija, second birth is when you get brahmacharya, and the third when you enter monastic life. Lust and greed. Now Thakur was used this to a large extent. He used the word Kamini Kanchan. Now it has been translated here as lust and greed. But the translation given by done by Swami Nikhilanand, the New York edition, after a lot of thought, he preferred to translate it as woman and gold. Now this caused a lot of reactions, especially in America, where women said, why should you blame? Why say just women and gold? Are not men equally bad? It is for men that women and gold can be harmful. But the same thing is true for, you can say, man and gold also. If you are looking at it from the women's standpoint. So here, Sri Ramakrishna, you should remember, is talking to male devotees. It is very, very rare that you find women coming and listening to Sri Ramakrishna's. Even Holy Mother did not have the privilege to listen. She had to listen from a distance when she was in Dakshineshwar through a bamboo mat with a small hole. So other women also, the other Lakshmi Didi and others, they, whenever they got an opportunity, they would listen to this conversation, sometimes listen to Thakur singing through this mat. So Sri Ramakrishna here then adds that because he is speaking to Rakhal's father's father-in-law, who definitely was a householder. So he says the attachment to a woman leads one away from the path to the Lord. And a man is unable to realize what has brought his downfall. So Sri Ramakrishna is giving an example. When I went to the fort, I hardly knew that I was going down a slope. When the carriage reached the fort, I observed how far down I had come. So there are these carriageways which take you gradually down the slope, either up or down. While going up, it is very difficult. But to go down, you just have the vehicle just rolls down and the horses effortlessly bring the carriage down. And after a while, you think you are going on flat land. But that gradual slope, when it goes round and round the fort, you find that after some time you are at a ground floor level. You are at the top of the fort. So I observed how far I had come. She doesn't let man know. Captain said, my wife is spiritually very wise. So all are laughing there because Captain perhaps felt that though he was married, his wife is spiritually wise, so I have no risk or no danger. And Thakur jokingly told him, when an evil spirit possesses a person, he does not know that he is possessed. He just says, I am all right. So he is trying to tell Captain Upadhyay. Of course, he is quoting, Captain is not there. So when Captain said Thakur immediately, Thakur never hesitated to speak the truth very frankly, whether the person in front of him was Keshav Sen or anybody else. He did not care. He was very, very frank. So he says, he tells immediately, oh, when perhaps Captain got the hint that when an evil spirit possesses a person, he just says, I am all right, I don't have any problem. So everybody is now sitting perfectly still, trying to listen what Sri Ramakrishna is telling them or cautioning them. It is not only lust which is a danger in family life, there is anger too. When you are thwarted in your desires, when your desires are not satisfied, you get angry. Then M suddenly makes a remark. M says, when a cat reaches out to snatch fish from my plate, I can't do anything about it. Now, Master Mashay is trying to shift the blame He says, what can I do? It is like a cat. If she snatches a fish from my plate, I am helpless. I can't do anything, because he had this own experience. His wife was tormenting him, and because of that, he was very, very upset and even had contemplated suicide. And to add to that, he was staying in a joint family where perhaps there was a lot of pressure how to deal with this eccentric, or maybe a uh, highly emotional, or his wife who was giving him a lot of trouble. So he perhaps he was trying to explain that it is something like a cat comes and snatches fish from my plate. I am sitting to eat. A cat, if she suddenly comes and picks, I can't do anything about it. So he was justifying his helplessness. Said, what can we do? Is there a solution for this problem? So he was perhaps trying to blame his wife, saying that I am okay, but because of my wife, like the cat, she's snatching the fish from my plate. Then Sri Ramakrishna immediately retorts. He said, why not? You must beat it once. There is no harm in that. The householder must hiss, but never pour venom. So he is trying to give a hint. If necessary, you have to scold. You just can't allow anybody to take liberties with you. Maybe she is your wife, but that doesn't mean you have to be at her beck and call. It's equally true for both, not only for the wife, but also for the husband. But that's why he says you must hiss. That doesn't mean you have to quarrel or uh, uh, try to create problems for them, but never pour venom. I mean, don't do it, but just as you have to beat or at least show a stick to the cat, they should know that this is something which will not be tolerated. So the householder must hiss, but never pour venom. Reason: one must not harm anybody. However, you have to make a show of anger to save yourself from the enemy, or he will hurt you. But one who has renounced need not even hiss. He is speaking of the third stage of life, where after having taken the monastic vows, he is not even allowed to hiss. Swami Vivekananda was once asked. That is why Nivedita was, though she was given Brahmacharya Diksha, she was not given sannyasa, because he knew that her nature is so strong that she cannot but react. Whenever there is injustice, she used to feel, and that served her well, because she was needed when she was wanted to fight for the freedom of India, encourage people. She did a lot of activity, a very hyperactive woman. So Swamiji knew that if I give her sannyas, perhaps that was one of the reasons. He said, you stay as you are. You don't have to take sannyas. Because he knew that for one who has renounced, can't even hiss. They have to quietly uh, suffer or tolerate it. But for householders, definitely Sri Ramakrishna is prescribing that you have to hiss, or at least you have to make a show of anger so that people don't take advantage of you. Then the devotee, somebody is asking, most probably it is M himself, but he doesn't want to be seen as always asking questions when others are keeping quiet. But anyway, he says, a devotee asks a question, Sir, it seems extremely difficult then to attain him while living a householder's life. How many householders can do what you say? We don't see such men who can just stand up to their ideal and, if necessary, admonish their wives. It is not seen normally in life. So Sri Ramakrishna says, why not? In the countryside, Kamarpukur, there is a deputy magistrate who is a great gentleman, Pratap Singh by name. He possesses many great qualities. He gives in charity, meditates a lot, and has developed love for God. Once he sent for me. So there are people like him. So he is just giving an example of a householder who was not only a householder but a very a great gentleman who was a deputy magistrate. It was a big post for Indians to have at that time. to become a deputy magistrate or a magistrate was something which was very, very rare unless you are extremely competent under the British government, you would not be made a deputy magistrate. So he says he just offhand he remembered there is a Pratap Singh who, though he was a deputy magistrate, he was very strong. He did charity, meditated, and also developed love for the Lord. So he is trying to convince M, or this devotee was asking that don't say it is difficult. It may be difficult, but there are people like him. Then the next topic, the conversation is going on. Need of sadhana, faith in the words of your guru, Vyasa's faith. This is the heading. So Sri Ramakrishna says sadhana, practice of spiritual, is essential to attain to what he has said. Pratap Singh did not get to that state just like that. He had to do a lot of sadhana according to him. So he says, you will not, why will you not succeed if you practice sadhana? So there is nothing which you can't achieve. It is like any other discipline. If you work hard, you will succeed. If you have genuine faith, you don't have to work too hard, but you must trust the Guru's words. So Sri Ramakrishna gives the relative importance that a person who doesn't have faith, especially in the words of the Guru, then he has to work hard. But if you work hard, you will definitely get it. But if you have faith, then maybe you don't have to work so hard. So faith itself is something which one gets as a result of a lot of sadhana done in the previous birth. That is what they say. It's not that some people are just born with faith, or some people, if they decide that I shall have faith, they will have faith. It's not so easy to have faith. So people like Girish Ghosh and all, apparently things were made very easy for them because of their 100% faith. Whereas there were some other people, like Sri Ramakrishna's example now, he says, Vyasadeva, Vyasa is Shuka's father. Shuka is the son who is supposed to be a greater Brahmagyani than Vyasa himself. Vyasa, who wrote the Mahabharata, who wrote compiled the 4 Vedas, and also wrote all the 18 Puranas. So Vyasa is supposed to be a central figure in Vedanta. So but he was, though he was a Brahmagyani, he was after all a householder. Whereas Shuka was one who, the day he was born, he just started walking away. Did not want, first of all, they say he did not want to be born. But because he had some role to play in this world, he had some contribution to make, he was born. And Vyasa tried to keep him back in the household, but he simply refused. It was with great difficulty that he was convinced to be born. Anyway, so Vyasa had to cross the Jamuna. The gopis had to cross at the same time, but there was no ferry. The milkmaids, who were men who were having tremendous faith, milkmaid said, Maharaj, what do we do? How can we cross? Vyasdeva said, well, I will take you across, but I am feeling very hungry. Do you have something for me to eat? The milkmaids had milk and khira, sweet meat of milk and rice, that is known as khira, and also a lot of butter. Vyasadeva ate everything they had. He was very hungry, obviously. He saw this opportunity and ate everything. Then they asked, Maharaj, what about our crossing? We have finished all the food now. As promised, help us to cross. Then Vyasadeva stood on the bank and said, O Jamuna, if I have eaten nothing, remember what he's saying. He says, if I have eaten nothing, he has just eaten, let your waters part so that we may all cross. As he said this, immediately the waters of Jamuna parted, just as it happened when Sri Krishna was being brought, the Yamuna parted, making it possible for Sri Krishna's father Vasudeva to cross the river, a flooded river. So also here the waters parted and the gopis were amazed. As he said, the waters parted and gopis were watching all this. They said, how is it possible? He has eaten so much just now, yet he says that he has eaten nothing and is under that condition, even the river has obeyed his orders. This is firm faith. It is not I, but Narayana within the heart who has eaten. So when he ate that food, when he had developed a habit, Vyasa had developed the habit of always thinking that it is the Lord within who is doing this, not me. That is the essence of all mantras. Namaham, not me. I bow down to you, surrendering my ego to you. It is you who are doing everything in my life. Whatever I do, it is you alone. So that is firm faith. And that faith saved, accomplished, this miracle was accomplished only because of Vyasa's faith. So the gopis were surprised. Now, Shankaracharya was a knower of Brahman. But initially, he also had ideas of diversity or differentiation. He did not have absolute faith in the oneness of God. So one particular day, he was coming up the steps after a bath in the Ganga when he chanced to touch the body of a Chandala, a Paraya, carrying a load of meat. Normally, when Brahmins walk, they are just careful not to touch these people who are doing this job of selling meat or carrying a load of meat, flesh. So he exclaimed, "Oh, I have touched you." But the Chandala told Shankaracharya, "Master, you have not touched me, nor have I touched you. The pure Atman is neither body nor is the five elements or the 24 cosmic principles." Then Shankaracharya, in fact, the Chandala had come in the form of a guru. And Shankaracharya realized that in a moment of advertence, I just forgot that I am the Atman. Though I am preaching that philosophy that the Atman alone abides, Atman alone exists. So if that is the case, then what does it matter if I touch a Chandala or not? So the pure Atman is neither the body nor the five elements or the 24 cosmic principles. And after that, so this is known as Manisha Panchakam, the famous utterances of the Chandala, which helped Shankaracharya to regain the Advaitic knowledge that he had temporarily forgotten. Then Sri Ramakrishna is giving another example. When Jada Bharata, carrying the palanquin of King Raghugana, began to talk about the knowledge of the Atman, the king came down from the palanquin and asked him who he was. Jada Bharata said, "I am not this, I am not that, I am pure Atman. I have full conviction that I am pure Atman." So the king was also surprised. Jada Bharata was also a realized soul. So he was so convinced that it was not he who was carrying this palanquin. So though he was carrying the palanquin, he was far inferior from the worldly point of view to this King Raghugana. But even he was inspired by this message and just came down and said, "Who are you?" I mean, he was convinced, he was saying it with so much conviction that he is the pure Atman. Then there is a subheading, Sri Ramakrishna is still continuing. And before this, I would like to just mention that the five tattvas or the 24 cosmic principles, that is in Sankhya they believe in this, they form Prakriti. The five principles are, you may say solid, liquid, gas and plasma state and space, empty space or ether. But it is known as Prithvi up, Teja, Vayu, and then we have Vyom. Vyom means space. So earth, water, fire, air and space, a combination of these elements, primal elements, form everything in the universe. That is the idea, the material universe. And the 24 cosmic principles, which is used to explain how the creation has taken place in Prakriti. There are five gross elements which we named just now: earth, water, fire, air, and space. That is the five gross elements. Then we go to the five pranas at a slightly higher and a subtle level. The five pranas are prana, udana, samana, vyana, and apana. We have discussed this many times in our Raj Yoga, what these five pranas are, what are their functions, how they act and react upon the body, and uh, how we are influenced by these pranas. Then 5 plus 5, 10. Next 5 is 15. That is five organs of senses. The five organs of senses, that is eye, ear, nose, and all those things, smell. So there are five sense organs of knowledge, and the five organs of work, that is karmendriya. One is gyanendriya, that which gives you knowledge, the faculty of hearing, the faculty of seeing, the faculty of smelling, the faculty of tasting. There's so many, and the faculty of touch. So these are the five organs of senses known as Gyanendriyas, the five organs of work, Karmendriya, the leg, feet, and all those things. Then we come to the Manas, the mind, which is one level higher. That is the Manomaya Kosha. Then we have determinative faculty or Buddhi. That is Vijnanamaya Kosha, where your mind becomes more refined and possesses the power to discriminate between good and bad, between good and evil, between the Shreya and Preya, and all those things. The choice making capacity based on spiritual wisdom. Then we come to the ego, Ahankara, and then the Chitta. All belong to Prakriti. So nature is made of these 24 cosmic principles. That is a beautiful classification of the categories which make up this whole universe. And they are totally different from Purusha or Atman or pure consciousness. So the pure consciousness, the light of pure consciousness percolates through all these 24 principles, which interacting with each other give rise to this whole created universe, either a solid, liquid, people, strong people, weak people, people with different gunas. So Sri Ramakrishna now saying that he's trying to explain the elements of yoga. And then he says, if somebody says, I am that, I am the pure Atman, out of conviction, of course, like Jada Bharata did. This is the conviction of men of spiritual wisdom or Gyanis. On the other hand, devotees don't understand this, that everything is Atman and all those things. They say, all that you see is nothing but the glorious wealth of Bhagavan. Bhaga means actually wealth. The glories, the Bhaga, one who possesses these glories known as Bhagavan. So whether you call him Ishvara or Bhagavan, Bhagavan means the glory which you see outside. When your ego goes, then you glorify the Lord. That is there in most of the Semitic religions. They just keep on glorifying the Lord, and that is their sadhana. They don't say, I am Atman. They believe in a God or a Bhagavan, a ruler, the creator. So where there are no riches, Sri Ramakrishna says, how could you know a wealthy man? A wealthy man, that adjective is given to a person who has riches. If there are no riches, then how can a wealthy man be identified? So also, if he doesn't have powers, then he will not be called Bhagavan. You just don't take a man on the street and says he is Bhagavan, because he doesn't possess those powers. Just as a wealthy man is classified as a wealthy man because of his wealth. Yet it is a different matter if God, because of devotion of an aspirant, says, the God has the power to say that. A wealthy man can go and sit with a beggar and say, you and me are friends. He can go in disguise, as Emperor Akbar and many kings used to do. Sometimes they used to go in disguise and mix with the common people. But that is their choice. If Bhagavan decides that because of the devotion of the aspirant, he wants to raise the aspirant, he goes down to his level to raise him. And he says, you and I are the same. Just as Sri Krishna went to his poor friend Sudama in his lowly when the Sudama came, though there was a huge difference in the wealth they possessed. One was a king, another was, but they were friends. So by the Lord's grace, he can come down to the level of the Atman, and Bhagavan can say that I and you are the same. That is a different matter. Then Sri Ramakrishna gives an example. Suppose on returning from the bazaar, a king's valet takes the king's seat and says, Sir, I am the same as you. People would think that this valet is crazy. But suppose the king is so happy with his valet that he says one day, I say, come and sit beside me. It will not be wrong. You are indeed the same as I. Now, if the valet goes and sits beside the king, there is nothing wrong with it. It's not right for an ordinary man to say that he is the same as the Lord. So, an ordinary man should not have the ego or pride to say that I am the same as Lord. If the Lord says it, it doesn't matter. If the Avatara says I am an ordinary human being, because the wave comes from the water, not the water from the wave. So a small wave can't say the ocean belongs to me, because it is a part of the ocean. It has got a definite limitation, definite form. So the wave comes from water, not from water from the wave. So water doesn't depend on the waves. So if the wave thinks, because of ego, if it thinks, oh, the ocean is also dependent on me, that is foolishness. Once the wave subsides, the water merges into the ocean. So Sri Ramakrishna says, the fact is that unless your mind is steady, there can be no yoga, whatever path you may take. So the waves of the mind have to be subsided. Then only you can feel this oneness. So this beautiful example Sri Ramakrishna is giving, that as long as the waves exist, as long as the thoughts exist, then these qualities will exist, that I am a good man, I am a bad man, I am an inferior person, I am a superior person, I like this, I like that. So all those things are nothing but waves in the mind. And unless the mind, those waves are steady, the mind is steady, the waves subside, there cannot be any yoga, whether you follow the path of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga. The mind of a yogi is under his control. So that is a very important point Sri Ramakrishna is making. The yogi is not controlled by his mind, he is in control of his mind. He has to control the mind. The mind cannot control it and dictate to him. The world cannot dictate to him what he should do or what he should not do. He should be a master of himself. That is the idea behind the word Swami. Swami means who is a master of himself. So this word Swami, one who is in control of himself. The fact is that unless your mind is steady, there cannot be yoga. Whatever path you may take, the mind of a yogi is under his control. The yogi is not controlled by the mind. When the mind becomes steady, what happens? Breathing stops. Now this is a kind of Hatha Yoga, or it is known as suspension of breath, which is known as Kumbhaka. Kumbhaka is when you retain the breath, when the breathing stops. The same Kumbhaka is experienced in Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. Those who practice Raj Yoga, when Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi, Dr. Sarkar used to go and see whether he is breathing. He was not breathing. The whole breath, the whole prana was under his control, so it stopped. And he still could come back. That is because he was an avatar, of course. Only they can come back. Otherwise, the same Kumbhaka, he says, you don't have to do yoga only to practice this Kumbhaka. In the path of devotion also, the devotee becomes speechless. The breath becomes suspended by following the path of devotion. And then Sri Ramakrishna gives the famous example of Nitai, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As one repeats, my Nitai is like a mad elephant. So a mad elephant is supposed to dance in ecstasy. It doesn't care for anybody. So the idea is given in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's songs and all, that my Nita is like a mad elephant. Now, when that state of ecstasy comes, Sri Ram Krishna says, once we go on repeating this sentence, my mind is like a mad elephant, my Nita is like a mad elephant, means Nita is exhibiting a state where he is in total ecstasy, is not bothered about anything. Then, after a certain stage, when he's really in ecstasy, he cannot even complete the sentence. It happened in the case of Sri Ram Krishna. He began by singing a song. He went on singing, and then suddenly he became speechless. That is what happens when one enters the state of Kumbhaka. So in Bhakti Yoga also the breath gets suspended. Then one says only elephant, elephant. Nita is like a mad elephant. Then my Nita is like a mad, everything goes. Only elephant. One is able to say only elephant. Then Hathi. Actually, the word is Hathi. So he will just repeat Hathi, 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 and then even Ti will go and only Ha, Ha, Ha. So that means that the more deeper we go, the less we will be able to express or articulate that feeling. The more deeper our emotion is, the more stronger that we feel the emotion, the the lesser our breathing becomes slower and slower, and finally it experiences Kumbhaka. So Kumbhaka is a state where yogis can suspend their breath for a long time. We could see this in Sri Ramakrishna's life. When he went into Samadhi, Mahendralal Sarkar used to go and try to feel the breath in his nostrils, and he was surprised that he could suspend his breath for a very, very long period. So in the state of bhava, breathing is suspended and one experiences kumbhaka. Suppose someone is sweeping the floor with a broom and another person comes and tells him, brother, so and so is no more, he's dead. If the dead person is not related to him, the man with the broom goes on sweeping and says casually, oh, alas, is it so? Okay, because he is not connected with that person. So he is not uh, he is not surprised with this news. He is not shocked. At the most, he may say, oh, is it true? Oh, he was such a nice man. But that's all lip sympathy. He was such a good man. The poor fellow is dead. He may make a few remarks, but nothing affects his heart. And he then goes on sweeping. But if the deceased had been a near and dear relative, the broom would have fallen from his hand and he would have sat down exclaiming, ah, what has happened? And his breathing would have stopped. That panic would have stopped his breathing for some time at least. And he wouldn't be able to think of the work that he was doing. He would no longer be in a position to retain his mental balance because of that attachment to the person who has died, the deceased person. Don't you see this with women? If one of them, then Sri Ramakrishna is giving another example. If one of them, now this is a typical situation when a group of women, normally it's not that it doesn't happen with men, but in those days, the gossip mongers or the women were more interested in all these things. And if you see, they will be taken aback by on the slightest pretext, they will all gather together and say, oh, this has happened, this has happened. But the same thing, men are a little slow perhaps to react. That's why Thakur is making jokingly saying that don't you see this happening with a group of women when they are together? One of them stands still, amazed at seeing something or hearing some news, and other women say to her, oh, I say, you have gone into bhava. So that woman is spellbound and she becomes emotionally so much involved in some idea or some news or something, and then she expresses it. And all others are also spellbound. And here too, Sri Ramakrishna says, the breathing of that lady and all around her has stopped. That is why she has become speechless and she can exclaim only partially, not the full sentence. So this is now Sri Ramakrishna is trying to explain. I will not start it today, but I'll just read out. It doesn't help to read Soham, Soham, Soham. So he's now talking about the Jnani. Naren's eyes protrude. His eyes and forehead have good marks. So perhaps these were a few signs which Sri Ramakrishna was an expert in recognizing. So if the eyes are protruding, perhaps that was an indication that he's a Jnani, is not a Bhakta. And his forehead also has some good marks. I mean, the size of the forehead, the shape of the forehead, and many things he could see. Sri Ramakrishna could weigh the hands of a person and say whether he possesses bhakti or jnana. And then he says there are different levels of people. Everybody is not at the same level. And then he says there are four classes of people: the baddha jivas, the bound ones, the mumukshus who seek liberation, the mukta who are already liberated, and nitya jivas who are not only liberated but they are ever free. They were never bound. So it is not that all these people have to take to sadhana. The nitya siddhas and sadhana siddhas perfected by sadhana, they are of different categories. They belong to different categories. Some have to do more sadhana, some have to do a semblance of a sadhana, because they're born with the spiritual qualities. So then, but some people attain the Lord after practicing a great deal of sadhana. Such people are also there. Where others are perfect from their birth. For example, Prahlada. So now these are the various examples. Now Sri Ramakrishna is trying to explain the difference between a sadhana siddha and a nitya siddha, who doesn't have to perform sadhana to reach that state. So we'll see if there are some questions. The time is almost over. So can you please explain the statement? When there is one question now. Can you please explain the statement of Thakur? Panchabhuter Pande Brahma Pode Kande. Yeah, that is a Bengali proverb which says, enmeshed or caught by the five bhutas. Even Brahman or incarnation, when he incarnates, the question was asked, why do incarnations demonstrate all these physical qualities, human qualities? They also feel sad, they also cry. Rama, for example, when he felt terribly depressed, and he went on crying for days together. When it's described in the Ramayana, when Sita was forcibly taken away, she was missing. He was so much worried, and he showed described the whole Valmiki Ramayana describes that situation as the Lord who was full of worry and full of tears. He was worried about Sita's disappearance. So all these qualities, they are natural to somebody who is embodied, because that is what is meant by these five bhutas, the five bhutas of Prithvi, then water, then Agni, that is fire, then air. These five physical bhutas, bhutas means things, five physical states of matter. In various combinations, they make a human being, they make a stone, they make a plant. So all these five constituents of matter are present in every living being or non-living being. You take up anything in this universe, they are made of these five elements according to the Sankhya philosophy. So according to the Sankhya philosophy, whenever an avatara, whenever Ishvara incarnates, he has to incarnate with the help of this Prakriti, with the help of these Panchabhutas. So even he has to cry. If an ordinary human being cries, even Brahman, who has assumed a human body, maybe is free, he is not bound like other people. But because the properties of the gross are enmeshing him, are one with him. So all the properties which a human being demonstrates, but he can get free of all those things. Whereas a bound jiva continues to cry. Whereas here it is a semblance of a semblance of tears that you see. They cry, but they don't succumb to the crying. So that is the meaning of this particular verse. Now there is one question which is very interesting. Which comes first, faith after sadhana or sadhana after faith, or both statements are true? Now what do you mean by faith? Faith is not belief. Belief, the word belief is translated as, you may say, it is not Shraddha. Shraddha, many people try to translate is, oh, he has Shraddha means he has faith, he has belief. Faith is not an exact word. Belief means Vishwas. Shraddha means not Vishwas. Vishwas means faith. Suppose you say, I have faith in a person. You trust that person, you have a Vishwas. That is the word used. But when you use Shraddha, which is the word which Sri Ramakrishna has used, when he says Shraddha in Bengali or any Sanskrit, what he means is faith based on conviction, on some deeper spiritual experience. When that experience convinces you of the unreality of this world, then you have faith in God and you don't have faith in anything worldly. That is real faith. Faith in God implies you can't have faith both in God and the mammon. That is why Jesus shouted from the rooftops. He said, you can't have both God and mammon. You can't have faith in both. It is like I want both light and darkness. It's not possible. The moment you bring in light, the darkness has to vanish. So you can't have both mammon and God and mammon at the same time. Mammon means the world. So the faith that this world is not going to offer anything permanent to me, if it becomes a conviction and you act accordingly, and a person acts accordingly, then he is a man of faith. He has a conviction, and that conviction makes him do sadhana more and more, so that that faith becomes stronger and stronger. So it's not that which comes first, they are all coexistent. So if the faith is less, then you have to do more sadhana, and more sadhana results in more faith. And you are as your faith is. As you think, so you become. That is the famous word of the sentence uttered by Buddha. He always believed that as your faith, so is your existence. You are what your faith is. So this faith cannot be just, it's not a belief. Neither it is something like Vishwas or some kind of, so faith is not an actual word, proper word. Shraddha is translated as something, a faith based on conviction. A conviction through direct experience of the reality behind certain things gives rise to Shraddha or faith. So that's the difference between, so faith doesn't come, it can come first if one is born with that faith, but definitely sadhana is done to increase your faith. When you do sadhana, when you get these experiences, when the conviction becomes stronger and stronger, then you have more faith. So it's not that something, faith comes at a certain stage and goes. If faith goes on increasing as you do more and more sadhana. Okay. So I'll take your leave now. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishnaarpanamastu.
Thank you, Swamiji. Namaste.